Welcome to the Glassworking shop. Well, today I'm going to try to put it all together. All of the pieces that I made in the previous video, plus a few pieces that I made off camera, because kind of like once you've seen it made once, you've seen it. And I don't want to get too repetitive. And, you know, that being said, everyone is different, and sometimes it is good to be repetitive, and I just try to keep a good balance. So this is a rather complex assembly, and it's also the largest piece I've ever attempted. This one is about 2 inches by 2 inches by 3 inches, and even though I've seen people make bigger pieces, for me this is somewhat challenging to actually be able to control it and deal with the heat. So here's a still photograph showing how the pieces are assembled in the assembly fixture, and I've got it all tied together with 3 pieces of stainless safety wire, and mostly the pieces are aligned kind of like I want them, and hopefully they'll maintain their alignment during the process, and if they don't, well, I hope they move in a pleasing way and give me a nice surprise. So off camera, I have prepared 2 rather large moils on the end of 19mm punties, because making a large moil on the end of a 19mm punty takes a long time, and it's pretty boring, and you can probably guess how it was done. So I've got these prepared ahead of time. I like using a fairly large moil when doing a murrini pull, because I think it helps me get a more uniform pull and avoid a big ass knuckle. So it also makes it heavier and makes it harder to manage, but hey, let's see what I can do. So here goes. Wish me luck. Reasonably complex murrini assembly using the NQALHA, Octavius Squeezer, and whatever hand skills I have, and hopefully a bit of luck. So here's my first, get this in the camera, kind of like pre-made with a nice taper on it. And I'm going to want to heat the end up ripping hot. And it's probably a good idea to just look at my bench and make sure that I've got everything I need. So I've got a fork that I made that out in the video here that will help take the assembly fixture out of the kiln. Oh yeah, this is going to be a heavy one. So the end is starting to get ready here. I'm going to turn down the torch a little bit. Now the next thing I need to do is going to be preheating the end of this stack even though the glass has been in the kiln, still isn't quite hot enough. And doing two things here. I need to kind of weld the ends together with a little 3mm clear rod, as well as just the pieces of glass themselves. I'm assembling a kind of a combination of some thick pieces and some thin pieces. And the thick pieces are not going to be a problem. They pretty much stay where they need to be. But the thin pieces can kind of get lost. This is a process that I've been using many times. A lot of my pieces are made using the cold assembly process. I've also taken a murrini making class from Steve Bamey, as well as talking to other murrini makers and watching videos, and I'm kind of familiar with many of the techniques, a lot. I think probably more glass artists do the hot assembly method than the cold assembly method, making the components and then fusing them together on the torch, usually on a bench torch. I've had really good results with the cold assembly method, and kind of got a little out of sequence here. Kind of let my punty get a little cold. I think I have a little bit more control over the placement of my components and a little bit more ability to adjust things if I'm able to touch them, and in some cases when I'm assembling my pieces cold, I'll take a component out that isn't quite right, heat it up, pull it down, straighten it out. So it's a kind of a combination of purely cold assembly and then a little bit of hot rework. And who knows, maybe someday, as I continue learning this process and coming up with new ideas, maybe I will switch to more of the hot assembly. But at the moment, the cold assembly seems to be working for me. I want to get the punty that I'm preparing, I want to get it kind of ripping hot. So my cold pieces are not perfectly aligned. There's a little bit of misalignment going on, and I want to make sure that my punty has a little bit of squishiness. So want to get the punty ripping hot and the part that I'm sticking to hot enough to stick, but not so hot that I start distorting my pattern. So here goes. Looks like one of my support wires ended up in the flame. And of course, it only takes a second to destroy one of those support wires. So, I think that's going to be sturdy enough. Of course, at this point, everything is really unstable. And I need to not waste any time I'm gonna, as rapidly as I can, gonna get the outside welded. Paying real close attention to the loose pieces. Once I start applying heat to this guy, it's going to start spreading apart. And of course, at this point, the piece is the most unstable. Also pretty darn heavy. My support wires hopefully have done their job. And this is, I tell you, this is the scary part of the process. Things can go very, very bad at this point. While I was welding the open end, the other end was getting cold, so I got to make sure that I get some more heat into that guy, and then watch for any sign of the outer pieces starting to spread, because they will. And they will spread out of control. Switching to handwork in this very, very critical phase of the operation. I'm going to be using the fixed dies on the squeezer because I really don't want distortion in this pattern. I'm starting to see a little bit. One downside for this assembly method, you kind of don't want to put small diameter components around the edges because they tend to bulge. Okay, I'm not feeling very much squeezing action there, which is kind of expected. Piece has no core heat whatsoever. Takes a really long time to soak that heat into the core on a piece this big. And all I'm trying to do on the squeezer at this point, if there's any of the smaller rods that start to maybe be moving outward a little bit, I'd like to give them a little bump back into place. And I noticed that there was a couple that were going away that I didn't want them to go, so just grabbed the old hand tool, the hand paddle, and that is, as I've said many times, I don't invent tools to automate the process of glass making. I'm not interested in creating a mass production glass factory. I make tools that are assistants to help the glass worker. So handwork is still important. Handworking skills are still important to develop. I think I've got the piece a little bit more under control here. So I'm going to let the machine take over a little bit. Just building the heat base, soaking in some of the heat. Here's a failure to watch out for. If you have a somewhat dicey assembly where you may have like an unstable weld or something that isn't quite together, and you put it in the NQALHA and let the clamp drop, you will achieve pain and failure right now. Just like in a soft glass shop, when you tap the blowpipe or tap the punty to get it to pop off, your piece will pop off. So one of the nice things about the NQALHA is being able to step back from the radiant heat. As this piece gets ready for pulling, the radiant heat is going to be even more brutal. I mean, already it's starting to become slightly uncomfortable, and as it gets really, really ready to go, boy, I'm going to put on the chrome suit and the face mask. In fact, I'm almost thinking of doing that sooner rather than later, because it's starting to get uncomfortably hot in the hot shop. But right now, that's a heavy piece, a heavy hot piece, and it's nice to be able to just take a break, stand back a little bit. Slowly, I can look at the end and see the end is dead cold. And what I'm attempting to do here, and it's a kind of a balance, that you would think that you really don't even want to squeeze until you have core heat, because then you're only squeezing the outside. But I need to consolidate the outside. I just heard something. Hope it wasn't a bad thing. You need to consolidate the outer layers in order to keep them under control as you build core heaps, so there's going to be a kind of a balance going on between them. And something fell. Hopefully it isn't anything important, but always a little jittery in the glassworking shop when I hear a noise, because it almost never is a good thing. This perfectly illustrates why I like a really big moil, because if I was heating the attachment point and only had like a little skinny attachment, everything would be getting loose and floppy and totally out of control. Over to the squeezer. I'm standing on the squeezer trying to get some compaction action, and I see that, yes, in fact, I have achieved some nice compaction. I'm going to return to the NQALHA and just let it soak in that heat. And yeah, maybe I will suit up. People who have never worked with a large chunk of solid glass at working temperature have absolutely no idea how strong the radiant heat is. I use the term brutal, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that. Using a metallized face mask shield thing here. I don't know, it may affect my sound a little bit, but hey, that's okay. Maybe I'll move the little microphone. Well, that's substantially more pleasant. I'm looking at the end to see if I see any glow internally, and seems still pretty cold on the inside. It takes a long time, and as the pieces get bigger, it takes even longer. I've seen other glass workers work with a 4-inch by 4-inch by 4-inch cube, and wow, that's a lot of hot glass to manage. It's a slow process. Nothing in glasswork happens fast, or at least nothing in big glasswork happens fast. If you're making little guys, well, okay, that can go fast. Another thing that you may or may not have noticed was that when I was welding the ends, I only welded around the rim. I didn't weld any of the interior parts, because I want to have somewhere for the air to go as I start heating this thing up and forcing out the air. The biggest problem in this kind of work is trapped air. well, I mean, one of many problems in this kind of work is trapped air. Reversing direction to avoid twist. Starting to get a little bit loose, and I think I'm going to probably switch to handwork. I'm using my new ventilation system with my new vent hoods, and appears to be working really well. I've got 12-inch inline fans mounted at the end of a fairly large rectangular duct, and even though an 8-inch fan running at full speed would probably have sufficient airflow, by using a larger diameter fan and running it slowly, I can kind of reduce the noise a little bit. That is starting to get close. I've just about got flat sides. Starting to see a little bit maybe of glow on the end, or maybe maybe it's just wishful thinking. And I'm not quite terrified yet, but boy, this is going to be a real challenge, getting this thing to finish up. So I'm going to switch squeezing dies to use, and of course the dies are hot, so I'm using my insulated glove. I'm going to switch squeezing dies to a slightly smaller size, because as the piece consolidates, it does get a little bit smaller. Make sure I have the right one. Droop back down on center a little bit. That's the recommended procedure on the NQALHA if your piece gets a little bit off center, is just stop rotation, stop rotation with the piece with the high side up, and let gravity kind of pull it down a little bit. Early on in the development of the machine, it was suggested that the better way to do it would be pause and reverse, but it actually turns out that doesn't work as well for some reason. Works really well for handwork, but on the NQALHA, the stop and restart in the same direction method seems to work a little bit better. So with handwork, I can focus the flame on the sides, on the flat sides, without overheating the corners, because on a square piece like this, there's always a danger of overheating the corners. I am noticing a little bit of droop. Which indicates to me that the core is starting to soften a bit. I'm standing on the squeezer and actually jumping up and down a little bit. This piece is now 4 inches long, which is the design of the squeezer. The squeezing dies are 4 inches long each, and that is pretty much, I can't really imagine working by hand on a piece larger than 4 inches. I know people do it, but at my skill level and my comfort level, this is about the limit. And like I said, anybody who's ever worked with big glass knows what I'm talking about, but for somebody who has never worked on solid glass this size, it is really scary. There is a lot of heat in that piece. Also, notice that when I'm standing on the squeezer, I don't just squeeze and then leave. I stay there for a while because there's still stuff going on in the core, even though the outside surfaces freeze as soon as they hit the cold graphite. The inner temperature, it is whatever it was before it was put in. Glass is an insulator. It takes a long time to lose that core heat once you've built it up. And actually, the squeezing process provides a bit of a benefit too, other than just creating a shape geometrically. It also provides a benefit to the glass, because as I'm trying to build core heat, if I keep heating the surface over and over and over again, I'm in danger of overheating the surface. And so every time I squeeze, I cool the surface while maintaining the core heat internally inside the piece. And that allows me to soak in more heat into the inside without overheating the outside, because I am using reasonably sensitive colors here, and I don't want to just totally boil and degrade and devitrify and destroy the glass on the outside, attempting to get core heat into the inside of the piece. So now I'm concentrating on the far end. The far end is a problem because it's radiating off into the air. The punty end is a problem because the punty is a heat sink. So you have to make sure to apply the heat in a reasonable way, focusing the heat mostly on the ends, and the center mostly takes care of itself. I mean, obviously you can't let the center get cold, but a little bit of a misalignment on the squeezer. Would have been nice to figure that out while everything was cold and I had the luxury of going out in the shop and fixing it, but hey, there's no turning back now. I got to work with what I have. Probably just a few thousandths of misalignment. This is, of course, the first release version of the squeezer, version 1.0, with the first units actually leaving the shop and going out to customers. It'd be interesting to see what they make, see how the tool is useful to them. Once again, standing on the squeezer with my full weight. The squeezer is designed for this. In early versions, I built them a little bit weaker than they should have been. Instead of I didn't know how strong they had to be, so I used bicycle cable for the pulling action, and that had stretch and they were breaking and the ends were coming off, and so now I switched to roller chain. And increased the thickness of most of the parts. It's definitely getting hot in here. Hot and heavy. Of course, I never say never, but at this moment, I'm starting to think this may be about the biggest piece that I'm going to be attempting. Like I said, I've seen guys do a lot bigger piece than this. And I can only imagine how uncomfortable that is. Of course, then again, I'm a tool maker, so maybe if I wanted to work with bigger stuff, I'd just make a tool for it. Standing and holding. It's really hard to say, since I don't actually have visibility into the inside of the piece. Kind of hard to say when it's right, but I'm just going to guess and say, you know, this guy may be ready. So I'm going to go grab my puller. And actually, I'm going to also put on some gloves. I know a lot of glass workers prefer the Kevlar gloves, but I kind of like TIG gloves. I think they give me better dexterity. I made the puller ahead of time, also using a fairly large gather of glass with a kind of a tapered connection to the rod. I want to get this fairly ripping hot. Now, kind of bending the glass around to get it to stick better. I'm going to start off, since I just got done putting a whole bunch of heat into the end where I welded on the puller. I'm going to move over to heating the opposite end, because that's one thing you don't want to do when making these large pulls, is to focus so much attention and heat on one end that you let the other end get cold. We all know what happens with cold glass. And it's never anything good. So I can feel a little bit of motion in the glass. I'm also still struggling with maintaining my hand position. And boy, I tell you, there is nothing easy about this process. I'll tell you, and I'll tell you, I say, and I'll tell you again, this is not easy. Or at least it isn't easy for me. Maybe somebody who's really good at it will say, dude, you're a wimp. I do stuff 3 times that big. I haven't yet learned to pull on the NQALHA. I've been thinking about it. You know, what would it actually take? Getting a little bit out of control. I'm getting more than a little bit uncomfortable. Definitely have introduced a twist. Even with the TIG gloves, my hands are getting uncomfortably hot. trying to get some of the twist out. I'm getting very near the point where I'm going to have to say it's the best I can do today. There's one thing I've learned. There comes a point when if I try to just keep dicking with it, sometimes I just make it worse. And as I've shown in previous videos, I can resize this perfectly in the squeezer. Okay, that is about as good as I can do today. Wow, what a process. So, that'll do it for today's video. I survived, and I'm hopeful that the piece is going to come out looking as good as I think it will. So, thank you for watching. It's been fun.